Hello, everybody. I'm Sean, and today I want to talk about how to know if you have a good therapist, how to spot a good therapist, and how to find a good therapist. Because in a recovery process from whatever mental health issue you may be facing, whatever trauma you may be facing, sexual trauma, emotional trauma, physical trauma, whatever issue you're facing, and you need therapy. Therapy is essentially your safe place. Therapy is very important in this whole process of healing, because without therapy you can't really even start the process of healing. Because to start the process of healing, you have to be able to identify the pain, and a lot of times we can't do that ourselves. We need an expert, right? We need a therapist who is trained to help us identify the pain and help us open up, because a lot of times we can't open up to ourselves from ourselves. A lot of times we need someone else to talk to who's not ourselves. We can't just keep telling ourselves. Self-soothing a lot of times is not enough. We need someone else to open up to. So therapy is a very important part of and major part of healing, right? And like I said, it's where you open up. So a lot of times what's common is for people with childhood trauma, growing up, they didn't have people they could open up to. The people that they were supposed to trust would neglect them every time they would open up, and give them a response that they adapted to, so it caused them to be scared to open up. So what's really important in a good therapist is that they have personal qualities that matter, personal qualities that can apply to you. They're authentic, they're real, they're true to themselves. They're not, there's no resistance between you and them. There's no issue that they have that they'll throw onto you, right? All they have is unconditional love for you, right? So these personal qualities, how they talk, how they act, how they are with you really matter. Because for a child, going into therapy, a teenager who's dealt with trauma, or an adult who's dealt with trauma their whole life, during their childhood, and they're going into therapy, and the therapist doesn't have good personal qualities, right? They're mean, they're agitated, they give attitude, then that's a really bad look for the patient and the therapist, obviously. But the patient now has trauma is getting re-traumatized from the healing process, which you never want to happen, because essentially that's what blocks people from wanting to heal. So it's really important that you find a good therapist, and these personal qualities really set the tone for the patient, really set the tone for the person going into therapy, and it can really have an emotional toll. Because if you don't have good personal qualities, if your therapist doesn't have good personal qualities, then you will never be able to open up to them. Essentially, you'll be scared of them, basically like how you're scared of your trauma, or how you're scared of the person or people who have traumatized you. So essentially it's the same cycle happening over and over again, except this is way worse, because this is supposed to be the actual healing process that is supposed to be your actual safe place. Because a lot of times you don't know if your home is your safe place, if your family is your safe place. You don't know. You have to adapt to it, right? But therapy has to be your safe place. It's a guarantee. It's supposed to be. It's their job. But if it's not, that's really bad. That can be very traumatizing and cause a lot of triggers and re-traumatize. And a lot of therapists require a lot of trustworthy, but if they don't have these personal qualities, then how can you trust them? So that's how you know you have a good therapist. They have good personal qualities, and they allow, with these personal qualities, they allow you to be safe and allow you to open up. A lot of times we were blocked up, closed. We couldn't talk, we couldn't say anything, and no awareness was brought to these issues. Mental health issues are not really looked upon as something huge unless the worst thing happens. Only until after someone commits suicide is then when they pay attention. But no one wants to pay attention before. Nobody wants to pay attention before in real life. But the therapist should pay attention before, and therapists will pay attention before and have the potential to stop you from making mistakes like that and making decisions like that, and going through more pain than you really have to, because nobody deserves that, right? So good therapists are true to themselves. They have no closage of being, right? They're open people, because essentially what's supposed to happen in therapy is that there's supposed to be a connection, right? So if the therapist is not open and honest, then how will the patient be open and honest, right? So a good therapist is non-judgmental. There is no matter what the issue is, they're non-judgmental, because a lot of times issues can be very harsh, right? Sexual abuse, PTSD, a lot of harsh topics that nobody else may know of, and you really need to open up about it. That is essentially what a good therapist is for, right? Because when a good therapist is non-judgmental, it doesn't matter what the topic is, they are always there for you, no matter what. The love is unconditional, the help is unconditional, right? And essentially, a good therapist is someone that you could talk to about dark topics. A good therapist is not really someone playing a role. A good therapist is like your friend, or someone you're just talking to, someone you just know, right? Because if they're taking this role of, oh, I'm the therapist, and putting you as this patient, putting you in these categories like, oh, you're this, or you're depressed. I mean, sure, they may tell you have depression, but a lot of times some therapists may put you in a category saying, this is where you fit in, right? But what that does is creates closage. It doesn't let you open up, because they're putting you inside a box, right? They're identifying you with the pain. But of course, a good therapist will tell you what you're going through, but they won't identify you with the pain. They won't tell you that this is you, this is who you are, right? So a good therapist relates to you more as a person than a thing, right? They relate to you more in real life than through psychology and psychiatry. That's why psychiatrists are very different from psychologists, because psychologists have a scientific mind, but psychiatrists also have a scientific mind and have scientific knowledge, but also have an open mind, right? So it's not just pills, facts. It's about what you're really going through, and that's really what a good therapist is for. That's how you know you have a good therapist, is that they're treating you more than just a thing. They're treating you more than just someone who went through something. They're really analyzing and really trying to connect with you. What this is really, essentially, is the intermediate space. When you and your therapist enter this space, now you have a true connection, right? But the only way to enter this space is to really relate to each other. But how can you do that when one or the other is treating, especially the therapist, is treating the patient like a package that was just delivered to them, and now they're just trying to get paid for it, right? It doesn't make sense. So back to what I was saying about childhood trauma. A lot of children, teenagers, go into therapy, right? And they have trauma from their family, and they're in therapy from that trauma, right? And they didn't have good parents a lot of times. Their parents were people that they were supposed to open up to and be able to, but they weren't allowed to, or they couldn't, because of the way their parents abused them and traumatized them. They couldn't, right? And neglected them. They couldn't, right? So a lot of times a therapist's role can be like being a good parent. Essentially, it's the same thing, right? The same rules apply. A good therapist, right, should be consistent. A good therapist should not necessarily, like I said, play any sort of role. They should just relate to you and understand you. For a parent doesn't necessarily have to be a parent. Parents who want to be a type of parent instead of actually relating to the kid, they just want to be a parent. What happens then is these people just end up trying to gain power over the children, and that's how abuse is created. They just want to gain control. They don't want to actually relate to the children, right? They don't want to be more than just a parent, because just because you're there with the child, right, and in the child's life doesn't mean you're actually there. You're there, but you're not really there, right? So essentially, being a good parent and being a good therapist are basically the same thing. So in therapy, the therapist, doesn't just try to take control of you, like a abusive parent might, or a narcissistic parent might. The therapist is really trying to create that connection. And like I said, once they create this connection and allow you to open up, and they have the good personal qualities that they've set the tone with, now you guys can enter the intermediate space. And this is where you go from being just a therapist and a patient to truly just being and having a connection with each other and relating to each other, and essentially becomes more than just talking, right? So these are really just the first steps of therapy, but it matters so much, because even the first steps can really tell you if you have a good therapist or not, right? Now me, I have been grateful, in the past months when I, just starting therapy for the first time in my life, I have not had any bad therapists. But, at first I was scared, right? Because I was scared to open up because of my trauma, because I had no one to open up when I was a little kid, right? So as I realized this, I realized that, and I adapted to my therapist, and I realized that they do have good personal qualities, and it's okay to open up to them. And that's really how the process of healing starts, when you open up. But you're only able to open up when you have a good therapist. So a good therapist is always honest with you. A good therapist always does the right thing. They don't necessarily do all, because sometimes you may be wrong, right? Even if it's what you want, that may not always be the best decision. So a therapist is always gonna do the right thing, and is always honest with you, right? They're always gonna tell you what's actually going on. They wouldn't hide anything from you, right? They wouldn't lie to you, because a lot of times when therapists do that, abusive therapists, they have their own problems that they're dealing with, and they don't want to accept their own problems, so they just throw it onto you. That's why they hide it. And essentially we don't want that, because then the healing won't truly ever begin or take, it won't ever happen within. So what you want to do is what the therapist really cares about, right? So if you don't want to do something, the therapist cares about it, right? The therapist matters. They listen to you. They don't only just talk to you, they also listen to you. That's a very big part of therapy, is that listening is also a big part of a therapist's role and job, to really understand the patient, not just talk to them and take over and control them. So they have a balance between listening to you and telling you, which is why a good therapist is always honest. So they will listen to you and let you do what you want, but also tell you what the right thing is to do. But still, even if you don't want to do that, they'll still accept it, right? Because they're not gonna try to fight you. They're just trying to create a connection, and that's how you know you have a good therapist. So yeah, but that's it for the video. Subscribe, and I'm out.